How's it going, everyone? Welcome. Eulero Gonzalez here, and let's going to continue to look at the uh, Model 1 in React, right? As a way to understand how do we get here and what are the different aspects that we need to be well aware if we want to create user interface with React, which is what is React at the end of the day, what are the things that allow us to build React, where it comes from, and how can we create our own React, and why we use this GSX as a way to save ourselves time when it comes to describe the user interface, and also understand the anatomy of the GSX, right? How you can define the expressions, how you can look at the difference between the HTML, uh, whether it's in terms of it is closing syntax, reserved keywords, close self-in tag, reserve keyword, the the case sensitive for attributes and tags, uh, and how you can create your component with GSX, all right? And what GSX is, and what is the difference between now template languages, and then how now GSX is converting to a JavaScript, which is this transpilation process. What is a transpilation? And because of this, how we're going to define our components in this particular way of defining our UI elements, unlike a HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, each on it per file, right? All of them are combined to one single file, which is a concept that, for example, in frameworks like Vue, actually they take that, known as the single file component. So here in React we have this, okay? So the thing here is that because this particular way of approaching to stuff, it is how we're going to build components. What is a component? What is the anatomy of a component? So what is the syntax form? How can we now create a component? What a component is transpiled to JavaScript? How actually the components receive is it is props and children's, and how now children's are uh, a, a an attribute from HTML tags when it comes to describe to the content that live inside of the angle bracket from HTML tag, right? And how is the shape of this components that we are creating when we define in React, right? So what does the object look like? And then, so understand now how can we iterate through certain elements. We look at particular examples, but how can we now iterate through elements? How can we render collections of values? So mapping through elements using the collection, the array, okay, and then describe that inside of the GSX templates or GSX expressions. And at the end of the day, since JavaScript expressions or in GSX, it evaluating its JavaScript expressions, not as statements. An expression is anything that it produces a value, okay? I will later on link to that episode so you can take a look at what do we mean by the expressions in a statement, okay? So how by exploring is the topic of the GSX expressions when it comes to iterate collections of values, and how can we do that by using is the methods that allow in the collections, right? So for example, like filter or map or reduce, which is our operations that are needed when it comes to show a collections of elements. And doing so because when we render those, or when we describe the GSX element, and when that is transformed to a JavaScript expressions, and since we are now rendering is collections of elements here, we need to pass a key to that indicates to React that this is a unique element, that this element must be kept track of. And it's important to know that this is something that is per array scope or per collection scope, right? It's not a global unique value that you must pass, it's just locally. And how can we now is render content multiple contexts using fragment, which is our a way of how can we add now elements to the DOM with a way how can we add multiple elements without a root group, without a root element group in them, and just now pull and paste that into the DOM without polluting the DOM. All right. So it's a convenient way of how can we now grab a collections of text and then put it into the DOM. And when it comes now to the conditional rendering, we also look at example of how can we render our elements and how can we now perform some further optimization of our renders, how we need to look at the particularly constraint of keys, that it must be at the top level, all right? And when it comes to now conditional rendering, it makes a lot of sense here. The conditional rendering is the several way of how can we now is, for example, adding some elements, giving a specific condition, right? So we can render that. So for example, even if our users, or in this case, for example, this icon, right? So how can we add in these particular icons of all of this check, or the icon that we're currently at? So there are several techniques to do that. One of them is using the if, where we're going to define now if inside of the function by following is the early pattern. Okay, the if early the if early errors or the early pattern here, which is a way of how you can now define what will be the component that needs to be rendered if one of them pass through each one of those gates or each one of those if. So this is what is going to be rendered. Or by default, if all of its conditions are not met, then this is the default, right? So the thing here is that understanding that if and why we cannot put now the if statement inside of the curly brackets, because at the end of the day it is evaluating its JavaScript expression, not a statement. So we actually look at an example of similar that you can add now an if console you can add if statements to a console log as a parameter, as a function parameter. This is quite the same here in React, right? Now with that, okay, we also explore another techniques to rendering is elements, and that is the double ampersand. And I wasn't well aware of how that works until yesterday, where in there we look at how the double ampersand actually works, truly works. All right, we use this as a conditional gateway, right? So the algorithm say you have now the left and the right, okay? And if the left give you now any falsy values, I'm going to actually take that and return that. However, if this is a true value, then I'm going to proceed to evaluate whatever is on the right side and give you the value of that. So This is quite important and interesting because now with this behavior, behave like a gate, right? When passing through all of these different gates, I do think that is quite convenient to understand this, similar to the OR, okay? When now a true value is detected, it's gonna return that. So for example, let's gonna put that practice here. You say something like this, and then for some reason, if we say, hey, let the value here, let's go okay, a fruit, right? Let the fruit be is, I'm gonna say here is apple, right? So I have now the value of apple. And here we're gonna do is something like this. I want you to return is apple, okay? And if doesn't exist, okay, I want you to return now is let's say bananas. So what you're gonna do here is to say, hey, I'm going to evaluate this expression, this logical operator. Tell me that if this is a true t value, I'm gonna return whatever value you get here. In other words, it'll be apple. So fruit, now the value of this is apple. And this is quite interesting because this is something that not behave in all other languages out there. All right. And I have 7 years working professionally, 6 years working with JavaScript, and I didn't know that this is something that's happening behind the scenes. So in other words, is that this is why I'm actually looking at this. So however, if we say something like this, all right, and it say, hey, if this is a true value, all right, I'm gonna return now is apple. So you're gonna say fruit. Exactly. So if this is a true value here, okay, if this is a true value, double ampersand behave like a gate that say, hey, then I'm going to return is the next value, if that exists. Whatever value it is, I'm going to return it, right? What it is undefined, so you can take a look at the fruit here, and this is undefined. So what I'm going to return is whatever gate that it is. So this double ampersands or double line, okay, both of them act as a flow control of a value. As a flow control of the value. So understanding this, which is part of the logical operators in JavaScript, for example, like this, right? Logical operators here, all right? Please put it in English. Logical operators here, this now act as a control flow mechanism, similar to the if, as it is. So if the left hand side returns now some falsy values, this is what it's going to return, okay? So if we follow the example here and we say, hey, let's go to rename now apple as 0, all right? And if we check that out as fruit, it will return now 0, okay? But for the sample, that's gonna make now this much more convenient and say, hey, if you return now 0 or falsy values like an empty string or a -0, which is another one, or a NaN, right? Which is another one. Or a null or an undefined. If we say null, it will return now a null, right? This is what it's gonna do here. Okay, this is what it's gonna do here. And then now some particularly things that we need to know, all right, with the if statement here, which is the conditional here, with an if statement. Okay, and let's take a look at this, right? This is another technique with double ampersand. The with double ampersand here. The with double ampersand here is this one. The with double ampersands here. The downside with using if statement is that we need to pull its logic away from the rest of the markup. While this is perfectly valid, it can make it hard to understand. Exactly. So the if statement make it hard to read which tag is gonna be rendered. So the double ampersand here allow us to render conditional components in a much easy way to read about it, right? Exactly. In a much easier way to read about it. Double ampersand behave now as a double ampersand behave as a control flow mechanism similar to if statement. And since an if and exactly similar to if statement, but with the benefit of being an expression. Okay, and here's when I'm going to put it here. The definition of expression that website sucker. Expression, exactly, the definition of expression, exactly, expression and to expressions here. This one. The definition of expressions: identify reference, binding identify, label identify, primary expressions. Exactly. The definition: cover parentheses expression and arrow parameter list. an expression, binding identifiers, exactly, an expression, as well as a literal. Okay. And the other is a statement. For example, like this, and a statement. All right. So the example here is this. Here's how we do it. So here's how we do it. Right? We can take this particular example here to render this kind of stuff. Exactly. Yeah. Finder. There you got it. Okay. So perhaps the code is not quite like this. This might be the code. Alright. And this is what is gonna get rendered. Similar to the console. And in JavaScript, double operator is a control flow operator. Exactly. It's a control flow operator, as I mentioned before. So it's a control flow mechanism. It works quite a bit like an if step, except it is an expression instead of a statement. To help us understand what actually happening here, let's take a look at the exact same logic but expressed using if and else. Function friend, name is online. Let prefix, if online, there you go. Exactly, it's behaving like this, right? So the double operator if said to be a control flow operator because like if and else statement, it will always result in one of the two paths being taken. If the left hand value is online, for example, in this case, right? Like so. So if the left-hand side value online is false, the expression short circuit and the value is to the is online, which resolves to false. If that value is truthy, however, it evaluates to whatever is on the right side on the operator. Returning is that. Returning is this, right? So you can think of the double operator a bit like a nightclub bouncer. If you try to get into the fake ID, the bouncer won't let you access to the React element. And this is when it comes to evaluate the logical operators. So be like the logical operator here. So logical operators are, in this case, so logical operators in when you have double ampersand, this is the logical logical, there you got it, logical and expressions, and here you got it. Runtime semantics evaluation. In the runtime semantic evaluation, you can take a look of exactly how exactly what is the algorithm doing behind what is the algorithm doing here, but exactly what the algorithm doing, what the algorithm is doing. And the runtime semantics evaluation. In the runtime semantic evaluation, you can take a look exactly what the algorithm is doing, right? So in other words, if you got a falsy value, if the left operator is a falsy value, null, undefined, zero, negative zero, not a number, empty string, and false, right? Which is falsy values is something that you can actually look at that. So falsy values or boolean type, or in this case is the two boolean like this. You can actually take a look at this, right? Positive and also zero, exactly. So zero, positive zero, negative zero, not a number, Jesus. Undefined null, positive and negative zero, not a number, zero, or the empty string returns false. Falsy values. Exactly. If the left operator is a falsy value, if the left operator, when it is value is convert into a boolean, exactly. If the left operator, if the left operator, when it is converted value into a boolean is a falsy value, the two boolean abstract operation, if the left operator when it is converted value into boolean abstract operation, when it is converted or coerce value into a boolean, coerce, exactly, coerce value into a boolean, this is the type coercion. Okay, if the left operator, when it is converted type coercion value into a boolean, to boolean abstract operation, is a falsy value, then it short circuit short circuit and its return is false. No, I'm looking is at the there you got it, logical, and it's going to return is the value and return the falsy value. Okay, it short circuit and returns the falsy value. If it's not, then return the value of the right operator. Okay, d double ampersand operator. So you can think of this like a gate. All right, so you can think of this like a gate. You can think of this like a gate. You can think of this like exactly like the bouncer at the disco, like the bouncer at a disco. If you provide a falsy value, it won't let you move, it will let you get in. The double operator or the double line operator behave similar to the double operator, but instead of short circuits behave similarly to the double operator, but instead of short circuits for false values, or for falsy values, it will for truthy values, and return the left operand. But I do think that this is quite interesting, because now we're starting to understand is how the language actually short circuits. But instead of short circuiting For false t values, it will for true t values and return the left operand. And I do think this is quite interesting in revealing, okay? Because now we say, hey, exactly. Because we say, hey, now, all right. But this actually encapsulates a lot of the things that we didn't know, but this is very specific to this language. Very specific to this language. Oh my God. Great, great. Cool, cool. And I come on gotcha here. The number zero here. And I come on gotcha here. And I come on gotcha. The number zero. So because it's gonna render is now zero, okay? Because zero is now rendering here. So exactly. Let's take a look at this example. Like so. If for some reason if we are fetching data from our server and suddenly we couldn't, okay, so if we're fetching data from our servers and suddenly we couldn't get any data from it, okay, yes. Good, good, good. And we're back. You know what? Give me a moment here. I'll be right back. I'll be right back. All right. And we're back. Right now, looking at the showing and hiding section. So after we went through knowing how can we conditionally render tags or components, whether it's using an if with the early return pattern or the double ampersand to actually make sure to evaluate when a uh, when a truth value is now evaluated, so you now render the other components. But what if you want to handle this if else case? That's when we use is the ternary operators, and you have to be careful with the ternary operator because if that uh, condition that is being evaluated is somehow producing is undefined or any falsy value, you're gonna pass through the second one. So this specific and small nuance and detail is required for you to understand, or for us, I mean for myself, to understand how all of these things actually works. Now, when we went through showing and hiding here, this particular section, in the example we have seen so far, our strategy has been to selectively add or remove a chunk of markup to the page, right? In the previous strategy. So there is another way to solve this problem. However, depending on your background, you might be much more familiar and comfortable with this method, which is using is the display. All right. Okay. We have now four alternatives for conditional rendering. Holy moly. Interesting. I am quite familiar to this, by the way. And that is the display or showing and hiding. So showing and hiding via CSS. I am well aware of this particular pattern. Yes. Instead of adding or removing the whole HTML elements, we can toggle their visibility using CSS. Okay. So instead of exactly instead of adding or removing a whole HTML tag, we can show or we can show or remove, or we can toggle. Exactly, we can toggle their visibility via CSS. And here's how it looked like. So you have now the style here that this is online. You say, hey, this is undefined. All right. If it is online, you're gonna pass now the object as it is. Hey, I want you to display this as none. And that's what it's gonna be evaluated anytime the function is called. All right. It's gonna create now a function execution context as well as an environment record. All right. So if the friend is online style, this will be undefined and will have no effects. The green dot will be shown. Exactly. If the friend is online style, if the friend is online, the style will be undefined and will have no effects. The green dot will be shown. Exactly, the green dot will be shown. If the frame is offline, the green dot will have display none applied here. will have display none apply, effectively removing it from the UI. I'm using an inline style here to set display none because it is more straightforward way to demonstrate the concept. There is a lot of different ways to apply the CSS declaration, including using a CSS class or using CSS in JavaScript solutions. Ultimately, all of these options are just different rows to the same place and can be used interchangeable in this situation. And we'll talk more about CSS soon. But the thing here is that we can actually here's what it looked like. So here is what it's looked like. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. So inline style. So I'm using is this here, inline style, because it's this. Exactly. So for the sake of simplicity, inline style here, inline style here, inline style is used here uh, to set display none because it is a more straightforward way to show the concept. There's a lot of different ways to apply the CSS declaration, including using a CSS class name or using CSS in solution. And then you're starting to understand why do we have things like a CSS in JavaScript, for example, right? And all of these different libraries out there. And all of these different libraries out there. And how now everybody's talking
Welcome
about
to episode 7 of the Blue Collar Coder Introduction to React series. I'm Jack Harrington, at Jaher on Twitter. So we've learned all kinds of stuff so far. We've learned about JSX. We've learned how to handle... Welcome to episode 7 of the Blue Collar Coder Introduction...
CSS in JavaScript. Exactly. For example, like emotion and stuff like that. Interesting. 4 years ago.
Welcome to the Blue Collar Coder channel. If you're a web developer, found what you're looking for. If you're just getting started out in your career, we have awesome long-form courses in React and TypeScript, and of course, they're free. If you are...
Brony X is at def. And XGX scores. And all that kind of stuff. This is the pro workshops. I think the using is the same for that. And interesting. Server-side solutions. Okay, it's pretty straightforward, right? It's pretty straightforward. So he hold now a YouTube channel as well. some GitHub as well. And you got it. Okay. I think this is from Oregon, right? I think this is from Oregon. There's a lot of sport. Mm-hmm. All right. Cool. Cool. Okay. Cool. Cool. Absolutely. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Figment CP versus Claw. Okay, this is here. Good. 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 Yep. Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, that was quite interesting. But in any case, is this so that particular approach? I am well aware of that. You know what I mean? I am well aware with that. So, uh, because of this, right? All right. So we can either conditionally render the element using the JavaScript operators we have seen, or we can apply some CSS to show and hide the element. So which approach is the best? Well, for usability perspective, it doesn't make any difference. Elements hidden with display nones are functionally removed from the page. And this is true visually, and it is also true in terms of keyword navigation and screen reader. There are some interesting performance difference. Though DOM nodes consumes memory just by existing, and the memory will be consumed whether or not they are visible to the user, in large application with lot of DOM nodes, it can be beneficial to use conditional rendering to reduce the number of DOM nodes at any given time and lower the amount of memory consumed. So on the other hand, adding a brand new DOM node to the page is much slower than toggling a CSS property. If the user is toggling the content, on and off, expanding an accordion menu, it could be faster to use a display property. That say, in most cases, the differences are so small that it doesn't really matter. Here is what I suggest. Use conditional renderers by default. Test your application on low-end device. If you notice that a particular transition feels laggy, experiment with alternative approach to see if you can approach the experience. Most of the time we don't do this kind of stuff. However, unless an application requires some performance optimizations, now yes, of course, go on with all yes. And here's what I suggest: use conditional rendering by default. This is one of those situations where it is very easy to fall into the premature optimization trap. Watch out for it. Hmm. Hmm. Okay. Okay. So comparing approach. So which approach is the best, right? Which approach is best? From a usability perspective, you know? So from a usability perspective, it doesn't make any difference. Elements hidden with display none are functionally removed from the page, and this is true visually, and it is also true in terms of keyword navigation and screen reader support. There are some interesting performance differences though. Node mode, as I mentioned before, as it is. But the thing here is that um, so the TLDR of this, so the TLDR use all right use conditional rendering by default and then test your app in low end devices. Okay, if it feels laggy, if it feels laggy, all right, so if it feels laggy, go on with a different alternative. Go with a different alternative. Okay, go on with a different alternative to improve the experience, to improve the experience. Yeah, this is one of the scenarios uh, where we can do this premature optimization of the premature optimizations. Okay. And then we look at the exercise, supporting screens. Let's get into this. So exercise. Mhm. And then exercise. Exactly. And then exercise. Here we are. Supporting screen readers. We have used JavaScript operators to conditionally render a green circle next to online users' names. But there is a problem. What happens when someone visits our application using a screen reader? What's a screen reader? A screen reader is a piece of software that parses the DOM and read it is content aloud using a synthetic voice. It is a vital tool used by folks who have poor or no visions. Also, screen readers are more broadly used by all sorts of people, including those who have dyslexia or other reading disorder. Let's consider the following DOM structure. What we have here. Another list, pretty straightforward, friendly list, friend, Andrew, Beatrice, and Jen. The trouble is that the div class green dot, okay, is semantically meaningless. This one is semantically meaningless, and so screen reader will ignore it. If someone can't see the screen, they'll have no idea that this randomness is meant to signify that someone is online. So, how can we make this information available to folks who can use screen readers? There are a number of valid approach. We can is using an area. My personal favorite is to use is to use some CSS to visually hide a chunks of text. We can use area, or we can hide the chunks of text. Here's what it looks like using a custom visually hidden. So you have this visually hidden. This text isn't on the screen, but it's announced by a screen reader. Your task is to use this component to add the suffix online after the name of online users. Accepting criteria. Users who are online should have the text online added after their names. The visually hidden component should be used to make sure that this text isn't shown visually. A user who are offline should not be affected. So the thing here is that users who are online should have the text online here. Okay, should have the text online. So okay, user who are online should have the text online added to their name. Okay, should have the text online added to the name. And the visually hidden component should be used to make sure that this text isn't shown visually. The visually hidden component, this one, and the visually hidden component is this. It's just returning is this style. It's gonna pass some data here, which is hidden. All right. This style will make sure the component is not visible, but will still make announced by screen reader. Adding display none will hide the element for all the users, including those using a screen reader. Okay. And the point is to do this. So users who are online should have the text online here. Okay. So user who have online should have the text online here, added after their names. Okay, added after their name. We're gonna add this, so there must be added is something like this, right? Like so online. All right, that'll be the text that we want to add. Okay, which is only users who are online. Okay. So what we can do here, if the name, to make sure that the name is going to be there, exists, then I want to now render this element, which is here. Say it's online, right? But because I do want to render the name in itself, I want to do something like this. Say hey name followed by this, right? This is GSX, all right? And what I can do is do something like this. So div, right? The class, class name, just things like this. And then you define here this div. Without this, and there you got it. This is the content that I want to render here, right? Is this one. Okay, so we want to render is the name and the online, and we're using is this because we don't want to so if for some reason we get any false C value, all right, we want to make sure that actually we are getting is a true T value. So okay, so far so good. But we are showing this if we're showing it this if they are online only. So users who are offline should not be affected. So in other words, what we're gonna do is something like this. Hey, if you are truly online, right? If you are truly online, I want to now is render this green dot, right? And then now attach the name here, followed by the online. No, say online. We can get rid of this. All right. And however, and then make this closing tag here. And then, however, if we do have that, all right, I just want this to say, hey, well, I want to call this visually hidden component, all right, and then inside of this, I want to is render the name only, right? So because here we're using is this div, and this div is only, what do you think you do it? And this is only like this, all right? So we do need to actually render this content somehow. And the way to do that is by wrapping this into this. You say the span, right? And then wrap this here. Okay. But we do want is to wrap this stuff here. I get it. So what we can do here is to use a fragment for that. And to wrap this inside of a fragment. Okay, so it's gonna wrap this into a fragment to show only those who are online. All right, and then well, now if that doesn't exist, I just want us to show is the element that is not, right? So something like this. So we wrap this in this way. So this is the element that we want to show here. Okay. This is the element that we want to show, as you can see here. And then visually hidden the name. Right. So users who are online should have the text online added after the name. The visually hidden component should be used to make sure that the text isn't shown visually. Oh, okay. 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 All right. Okay. Users who are online should have the text online added to their name. The visually hidden component should be used to make sure that this text isn't shown visually. Okay. Okay. A user who are online should not be affected. And if you are online, hmm, let me see if I can get this right, man. Because okay, so user who are online should have the text online here. So Beatrice and Chen. Okay, Beatrice and Chen they only have that. The visually hidden component should make sure should be used to make sure that this text isn't shown visually. Okay, which text? That this text isn't shown visually. Users who are offline should not be affected. I don't quite follow here, man. If you'd like to learn more about this component and see sub up version with the ability to toggle visibility in development mode, check out the visually hidden snippet on my blog. You might be wondering, could we solve this problem using an area label attribute instead? The area label attribute is a way to add additional semantics data to our markup. It doesn't affect the visual presentation at all, but assisted tools like screen reader will read it out loud. In this particular case, however, we can use area label because this is area level only works on interactive elements like buttons. As a general rule, I prefer to use this visually hidden component over area label because it includes all the same accessibility benefit but without the pitfall. It also works better with auto translation tools, with browser translating visually hidden content but not area label values. Thanks to Brian Hinton for the heads up about this. Mm-hmm. Area label does not translate. Auto translation support is less spotty than when I first wrote this post, but it's still unreliable. It does actually. Sometimes one of the big risks of using area to define text content is that it's often get overlooked in translation. Automatic translation services often do not capture it. Those who pay for localization service all too often miss content in area attributes when sending text string to localization vendors. That means content buried in area label, area placeholder, area role description, or area value text can end up being read to users in language different than their own. The very thing we are the very thing we are adding to help screen reader users can be excluding them instead. That makes constructs like the following particularly dangerous. From my post Uncanny A11G. Aref here, target blank area label, open in a new window, visit their sites. Area label, cancel or close. Span status meta, only those with this. Browser may or may not help users. Update from Chrome 4. Chrome may have regress of my prior tests and were not detailed enough. Either way, below I demonstrate Chrome failing to auto-translate area label. No longer true. Edge Chromium. Mm-hmm. Area label previously. Okay, this is going to this. But what is the point of this? What is the main technologies? For developers. Recap. The government electricity measured the attack of Ukraine. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. Adrian Rosselli. Separated distribute layer incentive CSS. Adrian Rosselli. AI power blockchain hallucination vault. Ah, it's generating its different text. And publications. My latest conference talks in post is posted talking tables. Access UI. Mm-hmm. From 1999 to 2025. Holy crap. Blogs and bio, consulting, writing, and a speaker. Most recently, I was vice president at Algorithm Studio Archive, which I co-founded in 1998 and departed at the end of 2015 to pursue accessibility and user experience consulting full-time. I have been responsible for bridging the gap between the worlds of design and technology for my entire career. I am a founder member of Evolved Or, one of the very first community dating back in 1981. God damn it. Mailing lists. I have written articles for trade journals, websites, and participate as an author and editor on several books published by Glasshouse. Community involvement. Member of the Web3C Web of Things Working Group. Buffalo Accessibility Meetup Group. Oh, because its focus is on accessibility here, mainly. Mm-hmm. Oracle Chapter School. Right for Roswell. A list apart. Holy moly. Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Automated WCAG testing is great. That's interesting, but this is part of his website. I don't think this still being available at least apart. Oh yes, they are. Interesting. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so yeah, wait a single moment because I didn't get it here. You say users who are online should have the text online added their names. Their visually hidden component should be used to make sure that this text is in show visually. The visually hidden component should be used to make sure that this text is in show visually. So the online text is in show visually. Okay. And users who are offline should be not affected. So in other words, you're gonna do something interesting here. We're gonna do something like this, and look at this. We're gonna first make sure that we actually is get a boolean value. All right. If we do get a boolean value here, well, it turns out that mm, okay, it turns out that we need to do something like this. We need to add an span, okay, where we want to add this element followed by the name and the text and the conditional text that'll be this. So what we're gonna do is this, all right? If we make sure that we get the proper text, all right? I also want to make sure that the the content that we get here, or in other words, we're gonna use now a fragment here, okay? So the content that I get in here, okay, is gonna be rendered properly with the online text, okay. But the visually hidden component should be used to make sure that this text is in show visually. So in other words, it is something like this. Is the visually hidden components, and when you pass the online here, it is now hidden. All right. But we gonna do this is only when there is no online. So in other words, what we can do here is to say is this. Okay. So the thing here is that I want to make sure that we get is this boolean value here to conditionally render this content if it is true or not. And this is the two things that we're gonna do here. So we already cover is the first case, all right. And since we're using this double ampersand, I want to go and use a conditional rendering, which is this, all right. The first one, or okay, this one, or this another content using a fragment. Okay, I want to now is render the visually hidden component here, but in this case doing this. All right, and there you got it. But this is how we're going to render is this, and I really love that it's using now Predator behind the scenes to actually autocorrect that, because this is what we want to show. We want to make sure that this is a boolean value, all right, is a true or false value, not a true T or false C value, no, a true or false value here, and then, well, make sure to render this content if it is true, or render this content if it is false, which is exactly what it's doing here, right? But there is a funny thing here, because If this is false, I don't want to show is this, right? I don't want to show is this. So this is the solution, right? This is the solution.
So we have our friend component, and it renders this little green bauble conditionally, which is wonderful, right? It looks nice, it helps people figure out who's online.
The question here is that is quite interesting, that we're using this as visually hidden element here to avoid showing that, right? Especially the hidden here. It's just a simple React element, okay, that is gonna receive is this particular style and say, hey, this is part of the children. So we're gonna render any content that we receive from it, okay? And the thing here is say, hey, I want to make this element absolute. I wanna put the overflow here. I'm going to clip this, provide one height, one width, like a pixel, all right? And adding display none will hide the element for all users, so including those user screen readers. So what you're doing is to say, hey, I would like to add this style here, all right, but I do want is to, if I say it's for example relative, but I do want is to it's like removing this element partially here. It's like removing this element here. Exactly, it's like removing this element here. But of course, because this element is something like this, and if we inspect this element is gets rendered here right after the Andrew, like this, all right? And in our case, it's gonna get rendered is like a small pixel, which is one of the reasons why it is using here as a small pixel that is putting inside of this like a small pixel here that is going to now render that content online, but it's not gonna be visible for it. And there is a reason why you don't do that. Well, in my case, I use the ternary operator here, okay? Because if this is online, only show this, okay? This is another way of thinking this. Users who are online should have the text online, and the content should be is hidden to them.
But it isn't really very comprehensible for people that are using screen readers. And whenever I'm solving for these kinds of problems, I like to solve it visually first. So if I actually wanted to show the text online here, how would I do it? And I can really piggyback on the fact that we already have this conditional code, and so I'm going to replace the green dot with a string which has the text online. When I do this, we notice that they're crammed right together, so I'm going to add a little space inside here. And this to me feels like what I want, so that when someone comes with a screen reader, people who are offline just have their name announced, people who are online have that little suffix added. Of course, I don't want to actually see it here as a sighted user, so I'm going to wrap this in visually hidden. I don't need the quotes anymore since it is a child of JSX. And this looks pretty good to me. Of course, it is good to make sure in the DOM that things look as good as they do over here, so let's check that out. And I do see that we have this span added with the text online. If you're wondering how this visually hidden snippet works, it's a little out of scope for this course. Essentially, this is a chunk of CSS that will make something visually invisible, but still right there in the DOM so that screen readers can pick it up. And you might be thinking, boy, that seems overcomplicated, over-engineered, why not use display none? Well, the problem is that that will hide it from screen readers as well. So, somewhat surprisingly, it's actually not trivial trying to hide text from people who can see the screen, but have it be announced by screen reader software, and this is the best way people have found to do it.
Mm-hmm. So this is the place where people have, this is the, okay, it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. So this is the way how people have figuring out how to do that. Mm. Mm-hmm. 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 Makes a lot of sense. Okay. So this is the way how now you can show this text to screen reader, but making not visible to the other. Okay. Hmm. That is a mind bending stuff, bro. That is definitely mind bending stuff. There is another one. User profile with badge. Certain community sites like LinkedIn or Stackflow have badges, small awards for people who achieve certain goals or who fit certain requirements. In this exercise, we're going to update a set of user profiles to conditionally render some badges. Here is what this should look like. For folk who have at least one badge, you get this. Penelope Brian A. Brack, June. Joined January 21, athletic photographer and Olympic medalist. For users who have no badge, though this whole section should be omitted, things should stay as they are. Byron Montgomery of Arlington 3rd, joined August 3rd, 1924. The markup for badge looks like this. You have a list of elements that you're gonna show here. And then you can need the accepting criteria. If the user has at least one badge, and an ordered list with the class badge list, if the user has at least one badge, and an ordered list with class badge list should be rendered using the data from the profile.badges. Each badges should be on its own list item with badge.label being rendered with it. There should not be key warning in the browser console. You can trust that the badges learned are unique. Stretch goal. If the user has 3 or more badges, a golden color should be applied. Okay. So if the user has 3 or more badges, a golden color should be applied. This can be done by adding the golden class to the in-order list, golden batch list. So the thing here is that we want to now show is this, if that actually has now a batch. So from the goal, render an unordered list with the class batch list where the user has at least one batch. Each batch is an object with this shape, slug string, label string. Okay. Stretch. If the user has a 3 batch plus than 3 batches, the golden class should be added to the unordered list in addition to the batch list. So what we're going to do is to add this unordered list of batch lists for those who already have that, right? So question is that how do we know where if we got the data? Okay, if it had batches. Okay, we have batches. Makes sense. Makes sense. Okay, so if we are analyzing here, okay, and then we somehow we say profile, and we got batches. Okay, we got batches from profile. Okay. And we know that batches is an array, all right? Is a collections of them. So what we're going to do is to render them. It says that profile, because it's this, it is an object that we're receiving, not an array. Okay, so if these batches exist, all right, we want to render that is right below here by showing is this. So before doing any code, we're gonna do is we want to render is an unordered list of elements here, as long as you have that. If you don't, no, right? So here we can define is the batches. I want to make sure that the batches actually exist. All right. I want to make sure that the batches is actually a true or false value, and then now evaluate that. If it is, okay, we can say something like this. If you're evaluating is the batches that length is greater than 0, okay, and we make sure that this actually JavaScript give us is a Boolean value to give us is a Boolean value is a comparison logical operators, numbers and string, expressions and operators, comparison operators that you got it. Like this, return true if the left operand is greater than that, or false otherwise. So we make sure that you're going to return that. All right. We're going to evaluate this value here, which is a number, and if the number is greater than 0, which means that do we have any number here? All right. I want to now is render this unordered list. I want to render is this unordered list. Unordered list. All right, with this following structure. All right, what you say is class. You got it. With the class golden. Say class golden. Golden. Only showing golden if you have more than that. Say batch. List. Okay. And here we're gonna render is this list element, where it's gonna render is all of this particularly elements here. So let's get into this. It's gonna render this by saying is batches which is evaluating is this. Hey, I want you to evaluate this expression batches dot map, and then I want is to for each one of those batches data. I don't know what is the shape of the data. Let's say batch. I do want to is render this batch, right? Otherwise, null for now. Yes, yes it is. And if I want to pass now a key for this, all right. I'm assuming that that data is giving me some ID for that. No. Slug and label. Okay, slug and labels. Slug and labels, which is the we can use is the batch.slug, or we can use just the structure in this and say something like this. Give me is the slug and the label. And the label, right? So give me this log and the label, and there you go, right? So it's gonna render only for those who already have that. So far so good. Okay. Exactly. So far so good. Now, exactly. And if you don't, well, show nothing. Just like that. So there's another thing. We wanted to add now this style here and say, hey, if this collection that we're receiving is contains more than that, I want to now render is this. So in other words, we're going to add now another condition here. Okay. There are several strategies that we can do. Whether it is that we have to say class name. We can say is adding an object here, all right, and then inside of here evaluating this expression, okay, by saying is that hey, you have this, I would like now add this condition by saying hey, if the batches dot length is greater than 2, all right, then I want is to, okay, then I want is to render is the golden. Say, hey, batch list with golden, right? And then otherwise is just the batch list. This is one alternative here, okay? This is one alternative here. So in this case, we just can check these conditions here. I do find that this is quite a little bit verbose and quite hard to read as well, So it is better for us to be descriptive by saying is batches length, okay, yep, something like that. You can say is for example, to improve a little bit of readability, is empty batches, okay. What you have is this, you say batches dot length is greater than 0, okay. Is empty batches then you can say something like this. If empty batches like 0, and then you want to evaluate this, okay, is empty batches, right? Well, you can actually just play with this, or you can say is batches.length is greater than 0. So you can say is batches, all right, is batches list, something like that. Again, but the point of this is to improve the readability of our code, because most of the time we're going to spend a lot of the time reading what in the F is all of this, right? What in the F is all of this? But we successfully add all of this as expected.
So our goal is to render a list of badges under each of these people's profiles. And before we get to all the conditional stuff, let's just render the data that we have, and we'll worry about when to display it later. So I'm going to add an unordered list with the class name of badge list. And inside this unordered list, I'm going to map over the profile.badges array. And I know that I have two properties on this object, slug and label, so I'll destructure them here. And I will render a list item that includes the label. I know I went through that pretty quickly, but I figure we've done this a few times now, so this should be a familiar pattern. In terms of the key, right, what do I add for this list item? Well, we have the slug, and we've been told that the slug is a guaranteed unique value. You're not going to have multiple badges with the same slug, so we can use that. So now this looks great for Penelope, Bric-a-Brac June. I had way too much fun with these names and the cat photos, by the way. I vandalized over these cat images on my iPad. But poor Baron Montgomery of Eglinton III has this weird empty rectangle. And it makes sense that if we just have an unordered list with no items inside, well, that list has some padding and border, and we see it even when we shouldn't. Maybe in the future, when the has pseudoclass lands in more browsers, we can solve this entirely on the CSS side, but for now we have to handle it in React. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap this entire unordered list in an expression slot, and then I'm going to check to see if there is at least one badge in the array. So I'm going to type profile.badges.length and check that it is more than 0. I'm going to use the AND operator, so that if this is a truthy value, then like the bouncer with the velvet ropes, we unlock the other side, otherwise it returns false. And this works just great. Penelope has her badges, but Baron has an empty section. There is a gotcha to watch out for here, and that's returning a number. So you might think, well, do I really need this greater than 0 check, right? Can't I use the number itself? But when we do that, we actually see the number 0 here. And it is, it's easy to think that if this is false or a falsy value, then it's like nothing happens, and if it's true, then we get the list. But what actually happens if the value is falsy is it returns that falsy value. So if this evaluates to 0, then the left-hand side of this operator is what gets emitted. So essentially it's as if we had done this, and React doesn't know that we don't want to render the number 0. We can imagine another case. Maybe we have number of stars, and then this is like some variable of stars, and if that variable equals 0, well, we probably do want to show that, right? React doesn't know that we want to treat 0 as a false value. So it works in the case where we have a true or false over here, because if we render, like, I'll do this separately, if we actually render false, React ignores that. It's not going to put the word false in because false is a Boolean value. Similarly, it won't do anything with null, and it won't do anything with undefined. And I don't think it does anything with empty string, but maybe it actually does add an empty string. You should generally stick with true or false or null or undefined. So this is looking pretty good, right? We have the correct number of badges shown for Penelope and Baron and Joan, but we do have this stretch goal to talk about. And the goal here is to update Penelope's list so that it has a golden tinge. And the way we're going to do that is I'm going to wrap this badge list in an expression slot. And again, I'm going to check to see if the length of the badges is greater than a certain number. In this case, it's going to be greater than 3, actually greater or equal to 3. If that's true, then I'm going to render something, some sort of class. Otherwise, I'm going to render another class. So right now, it's a bit silly, but essentially I'm doing the same thing in both cases, and we have an unchanged result. But if this number is greater than or equal to 3, I'm going to add the golden class in front. And now we see Joan hasn't changed because she only has 2 badges, but Penelope has been given this golden hue. One small thing we can do, since I see that I'm using this multiple times, and again, this is one of those very subjective things, but I like creating variables for this kind of stuff. So I'm going to say num of badges is equal to this number, and then I'm going to use this variable in...
Exactly, it's num of badges. This is exactly what I want to do here. It's like, say, okay, nums of badges. Exactly. And here you say, hey, this is the badges dot length, all right, just to only improve the readability of our stuff here. Num of badges, and is this, right? If the number of badges is greater than 2, well, that's for sure we're gonna get this one.
Both of those places. You might also be thinking that this is maybe a bad thing that we have the duplication here. It is avoidable, but because the duplication is so small and they're right next to each other, I actually kind of like how explicit it is like this, rather than trying to do something fancy and generate, a different string or concatenate golden to the string, because the order doesn't matter, right? Like I could have badge list golden, that's totally fine. But yeah, I like this. I think that this reads nicely and is clear to me.
And now the range utility here. Range utility, as we saw a couple of lessons ago, we can use .map to iterate over an array of data to render one React element per item. But what if we don't have an array? For example, it is common for rating to use a 5-star system. Let's suppose we want to render 0 to 5 little star icon. Depending on the rating, okay, exactly, range utility. Depending on the rating, spend a few minutes poking at the problem here. Your goal is to render n star inside of the star rating component, where n is the value of rating. And especially if you don't have any is that if you don't have any collections, what you want to represent now is a range here. Here's the markup for a single star. We got this. Your job is to repeat this element based on the rating prop. If the rating is 4, we need 4 copies. If the rating is 4, we need 4 copies. That's interesting. Exactly. If the rating is 4, we need 4 copies of this. So, what do we want to do? So since we're receiving is the rating, and we want this to render according to them, and this rating is now a number, okay. One thing we might do is to recreate that. And in this recreation is to say, hey, I want to create now a collection from this range to another one, and then map over all of this. This might be one particular approach. So you now create is an array memory, a sequencing memory, where you get only to iterate through all of this and render this. This might be one approach, okay? Yeah, this might be one approach. However, it seems that there is another approach, okay? We can is for that, so looping for that, all right? And since here it only accepts is JavaScript expressions, the other thing we can do is to create a for, where inside of this for we are going to now add it to a collections as well, which is quite the same as creating a spacing reserved spacing memory, right? It's quite the same. So exactly, one solution is to create a for and pushing is all of this element into that. There is nothing wrong with that. And the other is an alternative approach, which is the range. Create an array from 0 to 2 inclusive. So the idea here is to explicitly create an array for that, right? So yep, this explicitly is creating now an array for that. Say something like this. Say, hey, this will be is the star. This will be is on the star. This will be on the star, and well, we're gonna see that. Give me a second, please. I'll be right back. And we're back. Okay, but we do need to know is this. So my example here is say, hey, I want to render is this collection by say array, okay, from or array of, I can say 0, all right, or I can say array from rating, okay, to explicitly indicating is how will be our length, array from, okay. Then here you can say is this. You can pass now is, okay, and a map function in this. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. But I do want to create is a space in memory from the array, right? Mm. Array dot flat, array dot concat. Array of, okay, and I can say array of or array from. Okay. Mm-hmm. How do I create this? That's interesting. I can say is fill. I can say is fill. I can say is fill. That's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. Because I do want to create here is a collections of values. You say 7, you're gonna create 7. But I do want to say create all of this and then fill it with 3. Unless you say something like this, array 7. Okay, makes sense. And then fill all of them with, let's say, 0. Okay, all right. So you can specify is the length of this. Makes sense. Okay, quite silly. I wasn't aware of that. I am due. So I can say is, hey, I want to create now is with the given number of this. Okay. I do not want to fill that, right? You just create this with null values. You just want to use this to iterate through that. So by the time that I do this, I want to use the ESX to iterate start to iterate through each one of those elements. All right, where I'm just want to use is to render is this element as cities. So in our case is we do want to iterate through this. I want to create now an array with the rating. I have to make sure that the rating that we are receiving is indeed a number. Okay, yes, we are receiving that as a number. A rate and the rating. And then I want to iterate through all of them and just return this, right? That's interesting because it doesn't work. It's telling me that so if I clean up here the console and then somehow I want to now add in some key to this. Now it makes a lot of sense to add some value to this, alright? Which is, let's say, the value like this, and then I want to fill with it with any value you might wonder, 0, but as you can see all of them now is unique. Alright, so that you can now iterate through each one of them, right? Value to say, hey, the value, right? I want to get the value plus plus, right? To get now unique values as it is. It makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, because this key is not unique. So, la 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 la. If I do the fill MDN, but with array, fill with 0 from position 2 until 4. Interesting. Interesting. Unique values in an array in JavaScript. I don't want this to unique that and then to map each one of them for that. No, but I want to create them dynamically. Dynamically. Oh no, man, you're gonna hallucinate it, bro. You're gonna hallucinate it. No, stop. No. Create an array of dynamic number. given a variable called rating. Array dot from, okay, and then you indicate the mapping operation. Exactly, exactly, exactly. Array dot from allows you to specify this. That's all. So array dot from, exactly. So array dot from allow you to specify the first parameter, the length, okay, the length, which will be the rating, you know, and a mapping functions to say what is the value that is going to have each one of those values here, right? And then you say, hey, well, the value will be is the value plus plus, right? So each one of those elements will have is unique values. You say something like this. So if we evaluate this, and then we say, for example, is, hey, this rating will be 7. It's created by that. This is the mapping function. Okay. It says unexpected token. Ah, there you got it. It's an unexpected token. So the index okay. Let me on the front MDN. But the first parameter that it receives is this. Yeah, the first parameter it receives is that. Sequence generator range. Ah, there you got it. Length, math ceiling, the start and stop, and then the value and the index here. Oh, there you got it. Then you have this. Okay, then you have this utility function called range here. And then the star, it'll go from the star. Oh, because this is now a particularly function that allows to create all of these unique values here. So the first value is the value, and the second is the index, and this is how can we actually get this. Okay. Again, this is a very silly example of how can we create is for the, because the first value is a value, and then you got is the, we're not gonna use this value, that's what we put it here, but if we do gonna use is the index, which is like this. And this is how can we create this range, because now we're telling to the array building object, hey, I want to programmatically create this flexible dynamic elements here, right? We create that, and the other is a functional alternative here. Is the range. This is one of my favorite utility. I use it every project I work on. In fact, I have used it over 20 times in the code base in this course platform. I love it. To understand how it works, let's take a look at a simple example. Here you can produce this from the range, okay? In my example, it's producing it from 0, okay? It's producing from 0, okay? And then you have the CFI that you say, hey, I want you to now create from this to another one, inclusive 6, create an array from 2 to 10 and pick every second number, all right, with a step of 2. Essentially, it's an expression version of a for loop statement, like the double ampersand or the n can be expressions versions of an if statement. Now, the range is a for expression, not a statement. This can be okay. Here's how we use it. Function start rating like this, and then you get is this. Okay, because the using is now range. We'll produce an array of 0 up to, but not including n, where n is the supply rating. Then we use the dot map trick we learned about, okay, to iterate over the array, creating a copy of our star image for each one. For the key, we use the number generated within the array, since we know these numbers will be unique. Range function code is this. And again, this range functions actually comes with this. Sequence generation commonly here. But I do prefer to go with this built-in objects to generate that. Let the output be this, and the type of this, if it is undefined, so n is equal to star and star from 0, and you get now this, right? Which is a silly example of this. So in my case, I actually didn't need to use this, and in fact, I could create is that. So this is your range utility. Or how you can create it, for example, is range from that. A simple alternative is the array.rating dot fill and then maps with all of this. Exactly. But surely there is a better way to implement a range function using modern JavaScript. Many students also reach me out to share alternative implementation like this one. What do you think about this alternative? Is better or worse? Early in my career, I will have told you it was better. It is not inconsistent, which means there is less opportunity for typos and other bugs. And it's used functional programming principle. It doesn't mutate any variable, for example. And it was feeling particularly honest that day. I have to admit that the real reason I like this alternative code is that it feels sophisticated. It was a step above the basic stuff I wrote as a junior developer. It made me feel smart. My thinking has changed quite a bit since then. This day, I want my code to be as basic as possible. When I come back to this code in 6 months, I want to be able to make sense of it as quickly and easy as possible. I also want to make sure that the code I write can be easily understood by the most junior member of my team. It is hard to spot bugs in code like this. For example, did you notice that it won't work if you only specify star value? My vintage range definition is verbose and basic, but it works flawlessly, and I can make it sense if it without burning any calories. That's the most important thing for me. I dig into the idea in the blog post I wrote, clever code considered harmful. Yes. My favorite outlet for this kind of programming is Project Euler. Who the fuck is this man? Oh my god. Project Euler is a series of challenging mathematical computing programming problems that will require more than just mathematical insights to solve. Oh, holy hell. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. I mean good, but no. Currently we have registered member who has solved at least one problem representing 220 locations throughout the world and collectively using 114 different programming languages to solve the problem. God damn. Project Euler is a repository of challenges based around advanced mathematics meant to be solved with software. That catch is that and this is the reason why we actually use software, is to solve mathematical, is to solve computations for this. The catch is that your program should run in under a minute in 2004 era hardware. That means that a brute force solution often won't cut it. You will have to come up with a smarter solution. Here is an example. Spiral primes. Helpful tip: Euler is pronounced Eulia. Impress your math friends with this knowledge. Eulia. Ah, of course, because it's a German-ish name. I'm kind of breaking the Project Euler rules here. You are not supposed to share solutions to avoid spoiling to others. But don't worry, these solutions are totally indecipherable. You won't spoil the challenge, man. Here's one of my use. Here's one by a user named Willness reading in Haskell, a functional programming. So it takes this, where iterate and then assign the value to here's another one written in G language. Oh no, man. Clearly it takes a tremendous amount of skill to solve such a hard problem with such a small amount of code. I would feel very pleased with myself if I was able to write solutions like this. My solutions are always way longer and less elegant. This is not production ready code though. This is recreational code. This is code that you write to feel clever, to impress fellow math nerds, to exercise your brain. When you solve a Project Euler problem, you never have to look at the code again. It is disposable. We aren't handing it off to someone else to maintain. This is a different universe from environments we write code in day to day. The intern test, when it comes to day-to-day production, is this. I suggest we write it like this. I suggest we write it like this. Okay, it makes sense. Result entries, object.entries, you're going to iterate for all of the entries and find of these objects the components and the props. Okay, and then you're going to iterate through all of this, assign a value true t. Holy hell. Assigning values true to. So you're gonna receive the object and pass now a tuple key value where you're gonna ask yourself, is this value exists? Then you're going to create now an object, okay, with whatever you have. You're gonna create that object, okay, with the current value that you have at that moment, plus the key and the value. All right. If it's not, okay, then what you're gonna do is to just return the object. So if the value exists, or if the value is not undefined, or any of these empty values, okay? If the value is not a falsy value, is this is what it's telling you. If the value is not a falsy value, then I want you to take whatever you have in the object at that moment, and add this new value to this key. Otherwise, just return the object. And here you say result entry to say thus assign a value true t, which is the accumulator, and the value, the current value, together. I suggest we rewrite it like this. Component props response. Let me say the output. If the component, the output of component is equal to the component. All right. Okay. So let's go to add a new property here called the component, and let's go to add another property here called the props, and then return the output here. The original version has a lot of things going on paper. Less code, only 4 statements instead of 7. No duplication. The second version used 2 if statements that do essentially the same thing. Doesn't mutate any variables. More scalable, could easily be written to handle 10 fields instead of 2. And yet the original version is way harder to understand. I have to burn a ton of calories trying to work out what it was doing. I suspect many junior developers will completely stump trying to decipher it. In my opinion, the readability cost of functional versions is too high. It is not worth it. Why is readability so important? To understand why we think readability is such a crucial attribute of good code, let's take a look at the popular library, open source library, Lodash. Lodash is an immense popular tool. It is downloaded more than 27 million times. I hear GDD on a podcast talk about the key to managing a project like this is encourage a lot of folks to contribute it. The page that you're looking is not able. One of the ways he's done this by keeping the code at pretty fundamental level. By using simple basic construct, it ensures that an aspiring contributor can understand and contribute to the code, regardless of how much experience they have. I believe GDD mentions that they prefer if-else not ternary simple because less people have experience with ternary. When the goal is to keep the code simple, the expressive power of a ternary operator is detrimental. This is important to keep in mind if you're building an open source tool, but it is even more important if you're working in a production code base with other humans, especially ones that have less experience than you. 0 issues, no more. As I write this update in 2023, Loader has a couple hundred open issues. This is likely because it is maintainer. GDD has moved on to other projects. Bugs and code length. The cost of abstraction. Yes, the cost of abstraction. Inevitably complexity. Imposter syndrome. Fantastic hot garbage collector. Hot garbage. Clean code is dead.
When the last event was such a failure, everyone just kind of started like stealing each other's shit. So anyway, thank you so much for being here. No one's gonna steal your stuff. I'm really excited, and right about that time, hiring people to ask for extensions, whatever I could. Okay, now a little bit of CSS, cheat in my pocket. The structural integrity of that dress. Because I had learned that the main export of a good nerd is daily are feeling this as like imposter syndrome. You're not sure why, but you feel like someday you're going to be found out. You can't keep running fast enough to stay ahead of what people think that you should be. Really more of realized they had announced React. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. People in our teams, we told our robots to do it. So now, like, all the robots are like, hey, pretend that the job isn't just shoveling shit inside of you. You're one guy, and mentor us on code and how we could like do things a little bit better. And she really started to crack to allow you moist. And it's extremely pliable, right? I can shape this into whatever I want. This one, I didn't leave out rehydrate this in order for it to remain pliable. And when we try to like cross rules across this boundary, same for readability. Readability is a very high value in tools in the past that were monolithic, right? They don't have to be related. They're swappable, like you can think about as you, and you just do modal.js, right? You assume your golf game around getting, feel like, so ESLint plugin React, I feel like is the enemy of everything that I'm talking about today. I'm sorry.
Oh, perfect. Multi-component definition
sorry.
profile. Okay.
But it makes it kind of work like a button, but is totally inaccessible. Awesome. And then we have this div inside of this like unordered list. Super awesome. Now, normally this should be like super easy to change it into like me and anything else. Talk about Lego for composing. And Kent later today at 4 p.m. is going to be talking about how to think about code in a more composable way. And talking about kind of components over configuration, how to identify the people. Like, I have a good relationship going with your manager, right? It's not a surprise to them. Like, if these like red outliers over here. Like, if the churn is heavy, but the complexity is low, that's good. If the complexity is high, but the churn is low, you're golden. Don't touch it. The final thing is just to realize your kind of same idea of like componentization. Yes, I was like all architecture is like something fresh, edge, yes. Mute the thought leaders. Product is just a function of specification, and we're the function. We made it good, and then we made it fast.
Leaders.
And this guy says the same thing. Don't trust me, trust Kent Beck. Says make it work, make it right, make it fast. Mute the thought leaders. Product is just a function of specification, and we're the function. Shipping pays the bills, and living code is money code. So thank you for listening to this talk at Grifters Anonymous. We're not builders. You know, a lot of us aren't engineers, we're not developers, we're not architects. Like even in my title, it's like architect, and I don't know what that means except like whatever. We use frameworks and scaffolding like we're so coupled to this idea of building. But we don't do work that lasts 50 years, has to last 100 years, has to last 200 years in the future. Like we don't work in those timelines. Like I left for this conference Wednesday. I'm pretty confident that by Monday when I return, the code that I was working on is going to have new constraints. Like I promise you. And so I started to think that this role for me, possibly for anyone who wants to adopt it, is that we are farmers. Bum. Because we work on living things. These things aren't like built once and last forever. These things are going to change and adapt and learn over. And cultivating is a mess. It's not always nice. Question, who knows what the best fertilizer is? What? It's shit. It's shit. I don't know why I had to put it both times, but it's like, I know I already exhausted my time that I.
Okay, so that's quite interesting when it comes to talk about the range and that kind of stuff. So that'll be all for this video. Take care. Bye-bye.